Picture this. Somewhere in the Fertile Crescent, roughly 10,000 years ago, someone leaves a clay pot of grain and water sitting out. Life happens. They forget about it. Days pass, maybe weeks. They come back and the pot is bubbling. It smells sharp, sour, a little bit like something died in there. And by every survival instinct evolution has hardwired into the human brain. The correct move here is obvious. Walk away. Do not drink the bubbling mystery liquid. They drink the bubbling mystery liquid, and somehow, against every rule of common sense, they don't die. They feel warm, loose. Kind of amazing, actually. And just like that, without any idea what they'd actually done, they'd stumbled onto one of the most important accidents in human history. We're talking about fermentation, the process behind beer, bread, wine, cheese, yogurt, kimchi, soy sauce, basically half of everything sitting in your fridge right now. And here's the thing, nobody tells you. Humans didn't invent it. We didn't engineer it. We just didn't throw out the spoiled food fast enough. And then we kept doing it on purpose. So today, we're asking the question historians and archaeologists still fight about: did fermentation start with bread or beer? And more importantly, how did a bunch of accidental mold turn into the foundation of human civilization? Let's go back to the beginning, or at least as close to the beginning as we can get. Here's the thing about fermentation that makes it so strange as an origin story. Nobody sat down and invented it. There was no eureka moment, no light bulb, no ancient genius scribbling formulas in the dirt. Fermentation is a naturally occurring process. Wild yeast is literally floating in the air around us, all the time. Right now, landing on every piece of fruit and grain it touches, which means fermentation wasn't discovered so much as it was unavoidable. Leave sugary or starchy food out long enough in the right conditions, and it's going to start fermenting whether you want it to or not. Early humans weren't chemists. They were just really, really bad at food storage. And it turns out that's exactly the environment fermentation needed to happen by accident, over and over again until someone finally noticed the pattern. Think about how many times this must have happened before anyone actually kept doing it on purpose. Hundreds of ruined batches, thousands, probably, across different groups, different continents, different centuries. Most of them just got tossed. It only takes one person, one time deciding not to toss it, to change the entire trajectory of human diet. So let's set the scene properly. You're a hunter-gatherer sometime before the invention of agriculture as we know it. You've collected wild grains, or maybe fruit, and you don't have refrigeration, obviously. So storage is basically put it in a container and hope. Sometimes that container gets rained on, sometimes it just sits too long in the heat. Wild yeast moves in. Sugars start breaking down. Alcohol and carbon dioxide start forming as a byproduct. Normally, this is just spoilage. Bad luck, wasted food, except every once in a while someone's hungry enough, or curious enough, or reckless enough to try it anyway. And what they find is genuinely bizarre from a survival standpoint. It tastes different, sure, but it doesn't kill them. In fact, in a world with genuinely dangerous water sources, parasites, bacteria, all kinds of things you can't see, a fermented drink is often safer to consume than the water itself. The fermentation process kills off a lot of the harmful microbes. Nobody understood germ theory yet, obviously. They just noticed, the bubbly stuff doesn't make me sick as often as the water does. That's not a small discovery. That's a survival advantage. And once something becomes a survival advantage, humans get very good, very fast, at doing it again on purpose. They start saving a little of the fermented batch to add to the next one, without knowing it, essentially preserving a yeast culture generation after generation. That's not so different from what a modern sourdough starter is doing in someone's kitchen right now. Same basic trick, 10,000 years apart. Now, here's where things get genuinely contentious, even among actual archaeologists. There's a long-running debate, sometimes called the beer before bread hypothesis, about which came first. Did humans domesticate wild grains because they wanted bread, and beer showed up as a happy accident? Or did they domesticate grains specifically to make beer, with bread as the side effect? It sounds like a trivial argument. It is not, because if beer came first, if the desire to reliably produce a fermented, mildly intoxicating grain beverage is what pushed early humans toward planting and cultivating grain in the first place, that means beer might be one of the direct drivers of the agricultural revolution, not a fun side project that came after civilization. A potential cause of civilization. Researchers studying sites in the Fertile Crescent have found residue evidence of grain-based fermented beverages that predates confirmed evidence of bread baking in some regions. Stone troughs and vessels with chemical residue consistent with brewing have turned up at sites tied to early ceremonial gatherings, feasts, not everyday meals. Some archaeologists argue those large-scale brewing events required organized labor and stored surplus grain, which are basically the building blocks of settled society in the first place. It's not settled, it's messy. The counterargument is straightforward too. Bread is calorie-dense, portable, and practical in a way that early low-alcohol beer wasn't necessarily worth the grain investment for. Maybe both were happening at once, feeding into each other, rather than one causing the other. But the fact that it's even a live debate tells you something. Fermentation wasn't a footnote in early human history. It might have been one of the engines driving it forward, and beer wasn't operating alone. Around the same broad window of time, similar accidental discoveries were happening in completely different food categories in completely different parts of the world, with nobody talking to each other. Milk left in warm conditions curdles and ferments into something like yogurt or early cheese. Again, an accident of storage that turned into deliberate practice once people realized fermented dairy lasted longer and was easier to digest than raw milk. This mattered even more once you consider that a huge percentage of adult humans historically couldn't digest raw milk sugar at all. Fermentation broke that sugar down before it ever reached the table, which means it may have unlocked an entire food group for people who otherwise couldn't touch it. Fruit left to sit produces early wine, grapes especially because their skins are practically covered in wild yeast already, just waiting for a reason to start fermenting the sugar inside. You barely have to do anything wrong for grapes to turn into wine, which might be exactly why wine shows up in the archaeological record as early and as widely as it does. Vegetables packed in salt and left to sit begin lacto-fermenting into things that would eventually become kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, foods that could survive winters without refrigeration in a world where winter could just kill you. And this wasn't limited to any one region. Fermented soy products, fermented fish sauces, fermented root vegetables, variations of the exact same accidental chemistry showing up independently across Asia, Europe, and the Americas long before anyone could explain why it worked. Different continents, different ingredients. Same basic accident over and over. Leave organic material in the wrong conditions long enough, and fermentation happens whether you meant it to or not. Humanity's contribution wasn't inventing the process. It was noticing it worked and refusing to let it go. There's another angle to this that's easy to miss. For most of human history, fermentation wasn't just food and drink. It was medicine and insurance. Fermented foods were often the only reliable way to preserve a harvest through a season with no crops. A jar of pickled vegetables or salted fermented fish could mean the difference between a village eating in February or not. And fermented drinks in particular got used medicinally for thousands of years, long before anyone understood why they seemed to help. Ancient physicians prescribed fermented tonics for digestion, wounds, even fevers, not because they'd run a controlled trial, but because compared to untreated water and spoiled food, the fermented version genuinely worked more often than it didn't. They'd stumbled onto the same underlying microbiology that keeps yogurt companies in business today. They just called it something else. So zoom out for a second. Fermentation isn't just a footnote in food history. It's a hidden thread running through almost everything that came after it. It's tangled up in the origins of agriculture. Because grain cultivation may have been driven partly by the demand for beer. It's tangled up in food safety and medicine, because fermented foods and drinks were often safer and more reliable than untreated alternatives for thousands of years before anyone understood microbiology. It even worked its way into religion and ritual, shared drinking, communal meals, ceremonial wine, because a substance that reliably altered how people felt in a group setting tends to end up sacred pretty quickly. None of that was planned. All of it traces back to spoiled food nobody threw away in time, which means the next time you crack open a cold beer, or tear into a loaf of sourdough, or eat a spoonful of yogurt, you're not just eating breakfast, you're tasting the end result of an accident that happened 10,000 years ago, in a container someone forgot about, that somehow became one of the load-bearing pillars of human civilization. Nobody meant for any of this to happen. We just never learned to throw things away on time. So what's something fermented that you eat all the time that you had absolutely no idea had a 10,000-year-old accidental origin story? Drop it in the comments. You might be surprised how far back it goes.